Daniel Snyder yesterday, if Kyler Murray's homework clause were still in place, Daniel Snyder nearly put in 3 weeks' worth of it testifying before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. 11 hours. And this wasn't like the hearing we saw with Roger Goodell where it's this weird dog and pony show where one representative actually asks questions, the other one engages in a 5-minute speech and really doesn't ask anything. Another one's asking about irrelevant stuff. This is staff members, most of whom are lawyers, questioning Daniel Snyder about the very things that this committee has been investigating regarding workplace issues within the Washington Commanders. 11 hours. And if they weren't happy with what he said, if they think he didn't cooperate, if they think he was being evasive, we'll hear something, because we know politicians have a knack for making statements because we'll listen, we'll report them, we'll repeat them, and we'll pass along their concerns. So the bottom line is, and this comes from the report, I think from A.J. Perez of Front Office Sports, that Snyder didn't refuse to answer a question. Well, if you don't refuse, you can still be not entirely responsive, even if you didn't refuse to answer it. Roger Goodell is very good at being evasive. He didn't refuse to answer the question. He just didn't answer the question. He answered a different question. So until we hear from the committee or until we see the transcript, it will be impossible to know whether or not Daniel Snyder gave responsive and accurate answers to the questions he was asked, Myles.
Yeah, well, Mike, I mean, as a former lawyer yourself, you know that people can say whatever they want sometimes when they're answering a question and not exactly answer a question. So I'm very curious to see what comes out of this. If we get some sort of report, if we get some sort of real, I guess, meaty look into exactly what the committee was able to find out from Daniel Snyder. Because look, the Commanders have tried to convince us that everything that ever happened with the team is in the past, right? They've made all of these different changes. My gosh, like everything now has nothing to do with what happened then, except you have this thing that ties everything together, which is the owner of the team. And he is still there. And there has not been a reckoning that I think any of us fully believe is in line with what he is accused of having done. So because of that, I'm really interested to see what comes out of this. Like you said, 11 hours is a really long time to be testifying in front of anybody, let alone a congressional committee.
And you make an excellent point, because without the reckoning, it's impossible to fully embrace the changes, because we know the changes were made for one very important reason. Either he was going to make them or the next owner was going to make them. So you better change. If you don't change, you're out. But that still doesn't tell us what was actually done. What was Beth Wilkinson's findings about the things he did? What was it that provided the basis for this vague punishment that we're really not sure is even being properly enforced by the NFL? Remember, Roger Goodell said to the committee on June 22 in his prepared remarks, and he read them at the outset of the hearing, to the best of my knowledge, Daniel Snyder hasn't resumed his day-to-day activities. Well, you're in a position where you have reason to think that maybe he's back, because it's been reported that he is, and you have every incentive to investigate it and enforce it if he is, because he's not supposed to be by your own decision. So they just tiptoe around this guy. I think they're afraid to take him on, and it's good that he had that 11-hour reckoning yesterday. I'll defer to the transcript, but Myles, I know from experience, look, you do an 11-hour questioning. Now, the danger resides in the last hour or so, because people get fatigued, people get tired, people get a little upset, people get to the point where the preparation for the witness, because the questioners change in a setting like this, so they can tap out to someone else, but it's the same person for 11 hours answering the questions. And there's always a chance in that last hour you're going to say something that ends up being a major problem, because you're tired, because you're upset, because you think you're being disrespected, because you're Mr. Snyder. You're the guy that everyone caters to, and you've been forced to answer these questions for 11 hours. So, fascinating situation. It's up to the committee to decide whether and to what extent the transcript will be released. We'll see where it goes. One thing that I thought was strange, though, the commander's statement suggested the investigation by the House Oversight Committee ended last month. The committee says it's still ongoing. Just another example of the disconnect that exists and how the commanders want us to forget about the thing that we never have gotten any real clarity on and focus on the present. So, hey, you know what, Miles? They want us to focus on the present. Let's focus on the present. Let's have a look at how many people were at training camp yesterday. That may be an aspect of the present that they don't. What is that? That's the fan turnout for day 2 of Commanders training camp, according to Nick Giavala of the Washington Post. My goodness, that is depressing. That's like high school practice dads. That's all that is.
I think we might have had more people at my high school practice. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, man, you maybe shouldn't have opened up training camp on a random Thursday to, your fans if that's the kind of turnout that you're going to get. And maybe that was at the beginning of practice and more people showed up. I don't know. But I mean, what reason is there to really be excited about Washington Commanders football this year? I don't know.
Well, and they had this really strange, clunky process of you had to sign up for a lottery and you had to ask for the days. It's just kind of a strange thing for a team that should be making it as easy as possible for people to get excited and show up and be there. Again, like we were talking about earlier with the Cardinals, for the dysfunctional teams, it flows from the top. And I love Ron Rivera, and I do think they've made some changes. But until you change the person who's in charge, you're never going to fully change and fully address the depths of the problems that have caused this 20-plus years of dysfunction in Washington. All right, let's take a break. We are going to recap the news of the week, and then after that, we're going to have a draft that focuses on the most scrutinized quarterbacks currently in the NFL. All of that coming up on this Friday edition of PFT Live.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.